This is Solve It for Kids.
Hello, my amazing and curious friends. My name is Jennifer, the Dean of all things STEM and STEAM, and this is Solve It for Kids, the podcast that gives kids and families a peek inside the real world of scientists, engineers, and experts as they solve problems in their jobs using creativity, cooperation, and critical thinking. And now please welcome to the show my podcast partner, Galactic Space Geek, Jeff Gagne.
Hello, Jennifer, and hello, listeners. Just doing this introduction, we are already behind, Jennifer, because today's guest is that busy and she does that many things in space education.
Oh, I know, she is amazing, and what we're going to talk about is so cool.
Absolutely.
What problem are we solving today?
What would it be like to live on Mars?
Ooh, what would it be like to live on Mars? Oh my gosh, I want to know. This is going to be an amazing episode. Who is our guest today, Jeff?
Our guest today is just the right person to be talking to about this. She is the one and only Janet Ivey Duensing, creator and CEO of Janet's Planet, American Astronautical Society's 2022 recipient of the Sally K. Ride Excellence in Education Award, and she is the Director of Education for, Explore Mars.
Welcome to the show, Janet.
Thank you guys so much. Delighted to be here with both of you.
We are so excited to have you.
Yes, we are.
Especially because we're going to talk about Mars, the red planet. Yay. But I like to start out with, did you always, as a kid, love to look at the stars and think about living on Mars, maybe?
You know, I always loved space, and this is where I love to give a shout out to Miss Ernestine Yarborough Jones, my fifth grade teacher,
Yay!
1978. And she and Miss Carolyn Davis in their bell bottoms brought a telescope. Jeff, you'll love this. Brought their telescope out to the playground. Now remember, this is rural West Tennessee, so there was not a lot of light pollution.
Wow.
Miss Ernestine Yarborough Jones, beautiful African-American lady. Miss Carolyn Davis, beautiful redhead. And these two ladies were showing me Cassiopeia. And I just remember looking at Saturn and Mars for the first time through a telescope and going, oh, as smart as these two ladies. So really, I'd always loved science. I always loved the solar system, but Miss Ernestine Yarborough Jones made it come alive. She assigned the planet Saturn in fifth grade as we went through the solar system, probably why my logo looks a bit like Saturn. But I think from just that moment of engagement with, you know, it was the year, kind of like around the year Star Wars came out, proof of how old I might be.
I remember that. Yes, I remember that.
But I always like to credit her because, I always loved looking up. I had my Aunt Pat who believed in aliens, so I would stand out in the field and we would look for UFOs with her. So that was fun. So so there was a bit of Martian there. But for my love of the solar system, it really goes back to fifth grade and my amazing teacher.
That's so awesome.
That's wonderful. And I really love that you remember some of the things that you actually looked at in those very early days. So knowing you and being a fan, I obviously know your bio and know that you didn't go straight through school and have space and planets as a full-time career. What I want, we're going to use that for homework because we could get lost in your other career as well. For listeners, what I would like to ask you is, how did you come back around to space and planets and Mars as a career?
Yeah, so from that Bachelor's of Music and Theater degree at Belmont University, how did I end up anybody wanting me in the space community? The thing is like I graduated from college, literally had we were on the pitch sheets for Mercury Records. I was in a group called Summer Rose and Ivy.
Wow.
We would have been before the Dixie Chicks. They had just signed Shania Twain and Toby Keith.
Oh
and
my
we
gosh.
were in the room with Harold Shedd, and it was like we were doing demos and stuff. And then Mercury and Polygram merged and the record deal went away. But at the time, kind of like, in the gig economy,
Yes.
I had this job at the local theme park, Opryland USA in Nashville, Tennessee. And I was doing a show called the Opryland Kids Club. I was 25, feeling like a 10-year-old, working with kids that were like, anywhere from like 8 to 12 years old. And so like we were performing 4 times a day. And basically I did that thing from 92 through 97. And during that time, I thought, my God, the deal went away. Who cares? I love working with kids. This is amazing.
Yes.
I looked around and I was like, what can I do? And I was like, how about science and space? Going back to that of like understanding those, constellations and stuff. And, you guys might have heard of Interplanet Janet. She's a galaxy girl in that whole kind of schoolhouse.
I have, yes.
But I couldn't be that because, somebody else owned it. So a parent, one of the kids I performed with is like, well, let's take a look. Let's do a trademark search. Janet's Planet. And I was like, oh, I can have my own planet. Yes. So again, I didn't even know what I was going to do, guys, except when I looked around, mid to late 90s, there was nothing other than Bill Nye the Science Guy and Beakman's World, which I loved. Both of those. But basically, I was like, you know what? I'm planting the flag on Janet's Planet because where are the female science role models? Nice. I love that portion of like, if I was going to perform and do kind of children's entertainment or work with kids in some fashion, I thought, let's be smart while we do it. And let's with an eye out there to outer spaces, our, that interconnectivity, that star stuff we are, that, iron in our blood, the calcium in our teeth, the carbon in our DNA, we are stars. But look back, there's that sweet little ball, that blue ball that holds everything we love and is easier to live on than Mars. Maybe we can do something with that. And so literally, I'm going to say with a couple of nickels and some duct tape is how we started. Nice. And sometimes I pinch myself because, again, I just want to encourage anybody. Nobody's going to ask me for the 5-year plan or like a business plan, except follow those little guideposts along the way that kind of push you in a bit of a direction. Be willing to at least, kind of like be curious and see where they lead. I truly can't imagine not being Janet or Janet's Planet. It's been a fun ride for the last 20 years.
I mean, that's amazing. People ask me too, how did you become a children's author? And I'm like, the door just opened and I happened to just walk right through it. And it's been, amazing. And now, we have this amazing podcast. But okay, what I want to ask you, because what we're going to talk about is what would it be like to live on Mars? And I know everybody is so excited because, it's like people get ahead. Like we haven't, Artemis 2 hasn't quite happened yet. So we haven't gone around the moon. We haven't landed on the moon again. And people are like, oh, no. Mars is where it's at. So what can you tell us about Mars?
Well, the argument for a lot of those people is that, hey, we've been to the moon and let's head on out. Let's get there and do it and not that we're going to waste time. We are going to learn how to live and thrive.
Right.
And if you start to get into conversations with people, it's like there are things that will work on the moon that may or may not work on Mars because the difference of no atmosphere on the moon, you're talking about a very thin layer on Mars. But when we get there, and hopefully, again, for a long time, the goalpost had 2033 on it.
Right.
I think that it will definitely be by 2039, 2045. I'm saying that no later than 2045. That is like my thing is like, if it's not 2033, I think somebody's going to go, we're tired of waiting. And by 2045, we're going to see people actually land on Mars. But I'm saying our research stations are going to be on the surface, but we are not. We're going to live down in lava caves because we're going to have to live underground to like really kind of mitigate that radiation, mitigate those like 100-degree temperature differences. It might be 70 or 80 degrees at the equator during the day, but by nightfall, it's going to be minus 70. So we're going to figure out ways to live within kind of like these lava tubes. Now, a fantastic architect named Alfredo Munoz has designed something. You should go and look this up on YouTube. It's called Nuwa City, Nuwa. It's by Abibu Studios, and he's already designed this. So he's wanting to kind of put windows in mountains and sort of like kind of live in almost kind of like the sides and interior of a mountain. So then you could kind of see the sunlight. You might benefit from some of that, but it's beautiful designs. But again, we're going to have to live under and inside a closed loop system because of radiation, because of the temperature, and because of the perchlorates and all that dust. I mean, if you see some of the designs NASA has done, they even have this one thing where you're in your spacesuit, you go out, and then you basically sit down and you back out of it and you leave your spacesuit outside. Because again, if we're doing some comparison, the lunar regolith is as sharp as diamonds. Yes. So that's going to be, nobody wants to breathe that in. So the same thing, if we start getting all of that stuff that's on Mars inside our habitat, and we know those perchlorates can be very harmful to, say, the human thyroid, and that's part of this beautiful human endocrine system. So if one thing goes wrong, ergo the other thing. So it's going to be fabulous. And I'm sure that it will be full of places where we can innovate. And that's for anybody listening. It's like, what could you innovate that can live on Mars, right? Yeah. Go. I've told my grandkids, they're like, where were you going to be? Like when you're older, are you still going to live in Tennessee? And I'm like, no, your grandma's going to be on Mars. And so you're going to ask me, what happened to your grandma? And I'm like, she's on Mars.
That was my question. My question was going to be, are you willing to go to Mars? Isn't that right now, what, a 2-year trip, a year and a half? How long is the trip there?
Well, it'd be 6 to 9 months with the right kind. I mean, okay. Right kind of space.
That's long enough. That's long enough.
But it's like, why rush home when it's taken that long? It's not like my granddad who would like go anywhere and be the longest, driving trip ever. It'd be there for like 36 hours and be ready to head back. I think my answer is yes. It's like, because they have discovered that older ladies might be the people to go, because we would be at that point in life after a certain important moment in an older lady's life.
Yes.
Some things are done that we would not be as susceptible to some of those effects of radiation. So we wouldn't have to worry about so much of the cancer. So I always think about when people go, Janet, we got so many problems here on Earth. Why on earth would we think about going to Mars? We need to solve the things here. And I always like to, and I'm sure, Jeff and Jennifer both, your new book and Space Cares and everything like that, we think about, but if we plan on going there and in the process of innovating for Mars, and we figure out the spacesuit that's impervious to radiation, we've just solved something here for cancer patients, or maybe gotten rid of it altogether here on planet Earth. Or if we solve food scarcity, even where I live in Nashville, Tennessee, and maybe where you guys live, there are food deserts. Kids come to school to eat. They haven't eaten before they left. They make sure they have lunch. They make sure they have a snack. And so if we solve food scarcity and how to grow it in the most harsh of environments, again, I think of all of those benefits and the things that the space program has already provided. I do have to ask you, I want to ask you both and see what you think. Will we have to be vegetarian if we go to Mars? Or would you be willing to be vegetarian to go to Mars? You're already a vegetarian.
My hunch is that anybody willing to say, yes, I'll go live on Mars, will be willing to check the box. Yes, I'll be willing to. And just with the amount of meat substitutes there already are here on Earth, I think those meat substitutes will eventually get sent along as well, so that you will be having a plant-based cheeseburger. So you have that cheeseburger, because it's also not just about, Janet, I'm going to send this one back to you. It's not just about figuring out all of the specifics scientifically of the radiation and where's, drinking water and having enough food and having a habitat and what science are we doing. But the psychology of, we are the first humans that don't live on planet Earth. We now live on planet Mars. And taking some things with us, like a cheeseburger, helps us with, no, we're still the human race. We've been moving around our own planet for X thousands of years. Now we're just moving between planets as well.
Yeah, so I am very much a carnivore, so we'll have to see about that. But I have to say, I visited NASA's food lab in Johnson Space Center when I was there, and they are coming with some really creative and good tasting food. So I realized that long term, that's not great because you can't carry all that food necessarily with you and how they're going to do all that. But I feel like they could be creative, kind of like Jeff said, and come up with, meat substitutes. As long as the protein levels are what they need to be, I mean, you're in Mars, right?
Right.
So you're going to have to give something up to get to Mars.
But you know what's amazing? If you talk to somebody like Scott Bryson at Orbital Farm, he's talking about creating these closed loop systems and basically growing food in cellular bioreactors. So you can take some cells from a cow, put it in your old cellular bioreactor, and potentially you have, milk or cheese or hamburger, right? The same thing, there's another company called Finless Fish that has learned how to extract cells from a tuna, grow it in a petri dish, and by the time you get to somewhere, you have a tuna steak and a piece of fish that has never ever swam in the ocean. And they're actually creating it not only for space travel, but for how much mercury and other things in our oceans. So think of this. We may someday eat fish that has never ever once even swam in water. There are other companies that are 3D printing food. We can now imagine that. It's like a guy named Dr. Daniel Tompkins is talking about growing plant-based plastic. So imagine that you harness part of that plant for your food source. Part of that is to manufacture your next habitat. If there is a way that we could, figure out how to 3D print the food. The pizza company, I'm sad to say I can't remember it, but they could do it. Like NASA has one. I've seen that down at the Huntsville Marshall Space Flight Center. And they can basically make a pizza. They kind of layer the crust, they put on the sauce, they kind of manufacture the pepperoni, and in about 90 seconds, you've got a pizza. So I think every time I've ever heard an astronaut speak, they love everything spicy because the effects of microgravity, things tend to stuff them up. So we may all really love habanero peppers when we get to Mars and stuff like that, right?
Which would be very surprising for me because I'm not a spicy person. But if there's pizza involved, I'm in. I love pizza. I'm in.
It's so crazy. But again, think about just the different things when you're talking about the psychology, Jeff. Is that it's going to take 2 hours to get ready to, go outside with your spacesuit. And, you know what I mean? It's not going to be anything easy to take that, come on, let's go for a walk. But when we get outside, it's not going to be a blue sky humans 1.0 have known. It's going to be yellow, and the sunsets are going to look blue and not with all of those beautiful kind of this palette of color that we get here. But we do know that we can source oxygen and water from the MOXIE instrument that's been on Perseverance. So we not only have oxygen for astronauts, and kind of a life source, but also a fuel source. Right. So I have every confidence that the people who are thinking about the architecture and, the ways that we might live and with the ways we might put greenhouses and, even now on the International Space Station, they're growing mung beans and other things. On cotton pads, not with dirt, but again, they've also just kind of finally planted something in that lunar soil and stuff grew. So my hope is that life will seek life no matter where we are on Earth, the moon, or Mars.
Yes. So we've jumped into a lot of stuff about living on Mars already.
I know. It's see, how many times I've given this speech now?
But I want to sort of back us up just a little bit on us getting to Mars. We see lots of right now, your background, so folks will be able to see that on our page or on our social. We see lots of artist renditions of what it's going to look like. Are we going to have those dome structures? Are there going to, you already mentioned we will probably have research facilities out on the surface, but habitats either in the mountain or in those caves. How much equipment is going to go first with how many people versus, is it going to be equipment with robotic carriers to get it out of the rockets first? Or is it going to be equipment and people, equipment and people, equipment and people? What do you think about that?
That is such a great question. And I've heard debates for both sides of that.
Wow.
I think that you have to think about if we can create those robots that can literally go there and start kind of like manufacturing like Martian bricks, right? Martian concrete,
Sure,
et cetera.
sure.
You know what I mean? Stack those up or build those up in some way. Or are the things that exist on the surface inflatables, like the Bigelow systems and stuff like that?
Yeah.
Right.
And then are the first missions more like the Apollo missions? We go there, the astronauts spend, 10 to 30 days, and then there's a return mission. And then you begin to build on that. I think the big issue is that this isn't just one country, it's multiple countries.
Yes.
And so determining the curious thing is though, and kids, this is where decide to be in aerospace and aviation now. In the next 1 to 2 decades, the space industry, the space economy is estimated and projected to be a $1 to $2 trillion endeavor. So it's like you're going to see your first trillionaires because they're going to start figuring out how you get those Peterbilts and the John Deeres right there that are going to be autonomous, right? You're going to see how to grade and kind of like burrow and go into these places. Right. So I think it's going to have to be like a combination of efforts with going, which is most important for us to get there, to prove that humans can get there safely. Right. That we can land here. I mean, do we want to invest all of this infrastructure only to finally get humans there and go, I hate Mars. I'm right. You know what I mean? Like this.
It took me forever to get here.
It's not what I thought it was going to be.
Traffic was outrageous.
So I don't know. Like there's one part of me that goes, yeah, it's like I'm nearly more in favor of let's go and get human boot prints on the planet and really suss out, like, is this something that humans can do long term? Again, who knows, but that it's like, I even had one company that I heard of out of France kind of encourage that anybody going to Mars would have to have a pacemaker because think about it, you lose muscle mass, right?
Yes.
In microgravity. And which is your heart's a muscle. So imagine that all of a sudden, I don't know, your rover, something's going somewhere and you've got to like suss up enough, like, power to like motor and run across Mars, and then your heart gives out. And so that's a hard way to think too. I mean, when you're thinking very science fiction, like, will we have to have certain mechanical apparatuses within us that would withstand the effects of long-term microgravity? So I think the truth is we've got spacecraft that can get things to Mars. That's not the hard part. The hard part is coming through that very thin atmosphere, unlike Earth, who tends to slow. I mean, we just saw that beautiful splashdown the other day.
Yes.
To slow that re-entry down. But you're going to be coming in hot on Mars, and hoping everything deploys and hoping you settle down very softly. We've seen it done with, a 2-ton, couple of 1,000-pound, rover.
Right.
You do that if that's carrying, say, enough medicine and for adults. And
I was going to say,
right.
The most fragile cargo would probably be the human beings on that, because we have to have certain things to stay alive. And I know what you're talking about, because for my book, Space Care, it's all about space medicine. And that's what I learned is even your heart can change shape and become more like a ball if you stayed in microgravity for a very long time. So that's why I think it's important that we go to the moon first. I realize that the atmospheres are different, but we can learn more and it's closer. So, it's not a commitment of 6 to 9 months to get there. And I think we're going to learn tons from having a base there and being able to go back and forth. We're also going to learn the one thing that I think about is like, what do you see? I mean, are we going to have like an ISS type thing floating around Mars and then send, kind of do what they're planning at the moon is we're going to send a human landing system. And that's a lot of stuff.
It's like I've heard everything like, if you've looked at Buzz Aldrin's kind of like cycler plan, it's like, there's either you do a Mars space station that people, you're there and you go down and then you come back up? Or are you living on Phobos or Deimos? They're not that far away. They're kind of much safer targets. And if we've learned how to live on our moon, might it not be better? Because you don't have
there you go.
You don't have some of that stuff that you're going to experience on Mars. You're still
you just visit. You just hop over there.
You just kind of like go, we're just going to kind of like have.
We're going to Mars for the day. We'll be back.
I mean, because it's like, the dust storms and those kinds of things don't exist necessarily on those moons. So, so again, you start to go, what is that best thing? And, you've got you kind of like your committed ones, like I'm going there and I'll live out my end of my time there on Mars. So I think it's going to be interesting, but, even it's like they've named, as they're taking these samples, Perseverance is these core samples that will come back after the 2026 rover lands, and they're naming them cool things like Bear Wallow and all these great things. But again, imagine us holding those samples in our hands. What are we going to discover? We're going to go, wow, my golly, there's stuff in here that no human should ever get near. Right. Or we're going to discover like, oh my gosh, why didn't life thrive? And I think it's going to be a beautiful thing, mainly because, and maybe this is where I get a little altruistic, but it feels like space always feels like exciting, no matter where you are on the planet. It sort of like helps boundaries and geopolitical stuff kind of melt away. We're going, that's so cool, right? Yes. And so that's what I keep thinking. Maybe that's why I get excited about Mars. We can't go as just one country. It's got to be an international thing. So to think about 4 to 6 people from all parts of the world having a shared first time ever experience, stepping out on the red planet for the good of all of humanity back on Earth. I wonder if that will solve any ills. I've heard, and I'm sure you guys have heard.
It would be nice.
It would be nice. And, astronaut Nicole Stott has a beautiful thing that she always says to the kids anytime I have her speak to my Janet's Planet kiddos. She says, what she learned in space is that you can't be a good crewmate up there if you can't be a good crewmate down here on planet Earth. And so I have hopes when I talk to kids, and I'd be curious what, of all the stuff you guys have done with kids, what do kids think about going to Mars? Or from your perspective of what do you heard?
Janet, you totally just stole my question. I was literally just going to ask you, all right, Janet, here's the deal. You're creator and CEO of Janet's Planet, and I know the kinds of shows that you put on, and I know how many kids you see a year, and you just spent the last handful of years running quite literally the Humans to Mars Summit, an entire 3 and 4 day summit all about sending humans to Mars. What do you hear from younger people? Because you are engaging with so many of them specifically on this. Is it the rockets? Is it the landing? Is it the growing the food? What do you hear from them about Mars?
The biggest thing, and it's profound, they'll say, please don't make Mars another Earth.
Okay.
They're like, people, I've heard kids say, like, we should absolutely go. But if we do, we should not behave any more like we do here. And then I actually heard a kid, it was like funny. Maggie was at the Human to Mars Summit. This was back when we were the first year we were back, I guess, in 2022 after COVID. And so there was this end where Matt Kaplan, like, we do a why Mars or how, and I think this year's question or that year's question was like, how will going to Mars, will it change us? Will it make us better, et cetera? And she flat out said, nope. She goes, not now. This is sweet. And I did not pay her to say this, but it was here. She's like, well, she goes, no, it won't change us. She goes, but it could be better if Janet's in charge. And I was like,
there you go. First vote for president of Mars.
I was like, kiddo, you can have all my jewels. Here you go.
College tuition taken care of.
Well, we could talk forever to you about Mars. This has been so much fun, but I'm very curious. What is your challenge for our listeners, Janet?
Oh, I've got a good one. My question and challenge to all of you is to think about what would be your first words on Mars. Neil Armstrong said, as he stepped off that ladder onto the lunar regolith. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Yeah.
Now, when we talk to kids today, we sort of encourage, do you think they'd say mankind? We knew what they meant, but we might say humankind, all of humanity. But my challenge is, and I want to know from you, what would be your first words on Mars?
Oh, I like that. I like that one. I'm going to have to think about that one because, Neil Armstrong's words, of course, are wildly famous. Everybody knows them. So no pressure, kids. No pressure with that.
But let me just encourage you. We did this summer. We actually did an activity where we took some concrete and some iron oxide and made footprints.
Oh,
kind of like garden templates. So it could be like, a footprint in the garden, but it looked like you stepped on Mars.
Nice.
And along with that, we had our background and we had kids think about what that would be. Now, some of the funnier ones were like they would step onto set, as it were, in front of the Mars background and say, "Hey, Fred, didn't expect to see you here." And another one came on and said, "Kids, eat your veggies."
There you go.
But a few had some very moving, profound things to say. So I know you have it in you, and I can't wait to read or hear what you're going to say.
That would be great. Okay.
Excellent.
So yes, everybody send that to us. We would love to see that. So Janet, it has been so much fun having you on our show. Thank you for being on Solve It for Kids.
Thank you, Janet.
Thank you so much. And kids, as you heard, I love to talk and I love facts and I'm so super curious, even at my 29.4 years old that I am on Earth. I'm older on Earth, but I like counting it in Martian years. But that is the one thing that I would just say to everybody out there is stay curious, stay kind of with that childlike curiosity, and you never know what you're going to learn or what you might create. So I can't wait to see what you will surely do, everybody.
Absolutely.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Janet.
Bye, guys. Keep looking up. Keep looking at Mars.
I really thought we were going to end up talking to Janet for hours and have the longest Solve It episode ever. And we could continue talking about what it's going to be like to live on Mars. And Janet has such a unique perspective on that. So much fun. And with that unique perspective, she obviously has a fantastic challenge for all of our listeners. What do you think of this one, Jen?
Oh, I love this one. What would you say is your first word on Mars? I'd have to think about that. You could go serious, right? Or you could be like, "Hey, I'm here," right? I'm curious to hear what our listeners are thinking about for that, including ask your parents, right? Because your parents might have different ideas about that. If you come up with a really cool saying, we want to know about it. Yes. So be sure to tag us on our social media. We are at KidsSolve at Facebook, X, and Instagram. And you can always check us out on our website, solveitforkids.com, where we have episode pages for every single one of our guests. And you can learn more about Janet and all of the amazing things she does. And we'll probably even have some resources so you can read more about what it's like to live on Mars.
Yes, and especially for our younger listeners, it's going to be your generation that is going to Mars and are going to be living where there are humans on two different planets.
Absolutely.
But until then, Jen and I will be working on what our first words on Mars would be. You'll hear Jen and Jeff from Earth on Solve It for Kids.